So that's where you can put words or figures between the lines, or you can insert it, or you can cross it out, or you can put an asterisk. And obliteration means that you have blotted it out. Now, alterations that are made prior to the execution of the will, of course, are valid because it shows that those were the intentions of the testator. Pencil alterations are deliberative, and of course, they're not valid. Because anything that's written in ink is final. Of course, a will can be revived, it can be republished, and of course, you can have incorporations of a will. And revival means the restoration to effect of a will or codicil which has been revoked. So will can be revoked and it can then be revived. A will can be revived by re-execution of the revoked will or by a codicil showing an intention to revive the revoked will. So where a will has been firstly partly revoked or later wholly revoked is revived, the revival does not extend to the part that was revoked before the revocation of the whole will. And republication is the confirmation of a valid existing will. The testator is making a later affirmation of the validity and the contents of the will. Any gift to a child who predeceases the testator under the Wills Act, it says where a will contains a device or bequest to a child or remoter descendant of the testator, the intended beneficiary dies before the testator, leaving children, issue, and the issue of the intended beneficiary are living at the testator's death. Then, unless there's a contrary intention by in the will itself, the bequest shall take effect as a device or bequest to the children of the deceased. The issue would take in equal shares, and the reference to the child refers to every child, whether or not born in wedlock. And where real estate is devised to more than one person as co-owners without any words to indicate that a joint tenancy subsists between such persons, the device shall be construed as a device of tenancy in common. Gifts to spouses, where contrary intention is shown, it shall be presumed that if the testator devises real or personal estate to his spouse in terms which in themselves give an absolute interest to the spouse, but by the same instrument purports to give his issue an interest, that's his children, in the same estate, the gift to the spouse is absolute, notwithstanding the purported gift to the issue. You understand that one?
Can you explain it a little bit more, please?
Okay, so if you wrote a will, and in the will, let's say you had a piece of property, and in it you said you're going to devise that piece of property to your spouse. Now, further down in the same will, or probably in a codicil, you take that same piece of property and you give it to your daughter or your son. The law says that it will go to the spouse.
Okay.
Question, why is that? Why is that?
That's what the law states. What happened now?
No, nothing.
Now I did some homework for you all. Remember we were discussing last class prenups?
Yes.
Okay, and I told you all there was a case in the Bahamas on the prenup. The case is M versus F. Without giving the names of the parties, that's what they have it as, M versus F. And it says that in that case, the protection of premarital assets and prenup agreements in the Bahamas were held. So in the past, before this case was ruled, the Bahamas' approach was always that a prenup or post-nup, anti-nup or post-nup, they undermine the concept of marriage as a lifelong union. So they were against prenuptial agreements. But in this decision, Sir Michael Barnett tested the notion dispelled by the law lords in the UK regarding the view that a prenup agreement is merely persuasive and not binding in considering the distribution of marital assets under the breakdown of marriage. So in this case, the Chief Justice had to consider a few things. One was the parties to the marriage were American citizens and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The second thing was the husband was a wealthy and affluent businessman, and his wife was not as affluent, cohabited together for a period of 1 year before they were married. The wife asserted that prior to executing the prenup, she was several months pregnant with the husband's first child. The husband held assets which were said to be protected under the prenup agreement. The wife sought independent legal advice of 2 attorneys prior to executing the prenup. The husband and wife entered into the prenup agreement 2 days before the wedding. So in order for the court to give weight to the prenup, the court had to consider whether the prenup should be accepted or whether it ought to be guided by it. It was accepted by the court that the agreement entered into between the husband and the wife does not oust the jurisdiction of the court. For years, agreements between spouses were considered void for public policy reasons, but that is no longer the case. In fact, over the years, prenups, more or less contracts, have become increasingly common among wealthy persons, and much of these agreements have been accepted by courts governing what should occur between parties when the marriage comes to an end. And this is, of course, subject to the discretion of the court, and the application of a test to be exercised is one of fairness and manifest unfairness. So the court must be satisfied of the following: whether the agreement was entered into freely and voluntarily by both parties with full appreciation of its implication, and if it was, whether it would be unfair to give effect to the agreement. So in this case of M versus F, the Chief Justice upheld the terms of the prenup entered into between the husband and the wife on the basis that the parties, the wife that is, entered into agreement freely and voluntarily. Similarly, the parties must have fully appreciated the implications of the agreement. Based on the first criteria being in the affirmative, it would therefore be unfair not to give effect to the agreement. So yes, the court can consider prenuptial agreements, as they call it, ante or post-nuptial agreement, as long as you meet the grounds that you entered into freely and voluntarily, that you appreciated what you were doing, and whether it would be unfair to give effect to the agreement. Any comments, questions? No?
I have a question, based on
Okay.
when you were mentioning something with gifts to spouses. If
Mhm.
I first purchase a piece of property solely and I'm married, wouldn't my husband automatically have, what rights to the property as well?
You put it in both names?
No, just my name, but I'm married. Would he
If
be
it,
entitled to anything pertaining to the property?
now you're talking about in a divorce. You're talking about on death now, and this person has written a will.
Or let's say, let's go with the divorce part first.
Okay.
Would he be entitled to my property that I would have purchased solely by myself during a divorce proceeding?
Yes.
Why? Because I
Unless
purchased
you
it
had a,
myself.
unless it was it, did you have a ante-nup or post-nup?
No,
Okay, well then once you're in the marriage, you own it jointly. The
even though
percentage,
his name isn't on it.
yes, he can still say, don't forget now, remember in our conversation last week, he can still say he contributed. So while you were saving to pay for your property, he may have been doing other things around the house. He
Okay.
could have been footing other bills.
Hmm.
So you have to be careful of the arrangements that you make.
This is only if they will choose to live on that property, right?
No, why?
No,
It's all assets. When you get a divorce, you have to list all your assets. They have to list all their assets and all of their liabilities.
But if I bought it before we got married and we haven't touched it since, nor have spent any money on it to develop it, how is it that he's
No,
entitled to
she
that?
said after. She said after.
Was it after, Shaniko?
yeah, after.
Yeah, she said after.
Oh, okay.
So what if it's before you get married?
No, but then you'd be able to prove to the court that you bought that before and he didn't contribute towards it and there was no intention to make it a part of the marital assets.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have the property before you get married and you don't do anything with it, then you, during a divorce proceeding, you get to keep your property.
Yeah, unless of course you all had a discussion of your intention and he was making some progress towards whatever you had planned.
But what did that come down to? What he says versus she says? Would he
Yeah.
then have to prove that? Or
Well, it's
at
not
least
really,
just
it's
say
not
that?
really proving. It's not really proving. It's when both persons give their contribution as to what happened or what was intended. Which one is more plausible?
Okay.
Because sometimes the things that people say really don't make any sense. And you can tell when someone is grasping, trying to put things together versus someone who knows exactly what they said and what they intended and what was done. So I just thought I'd share that with you all since you asked about prenups last class.
Miss Acha,
Mm-hmm.
I had a question because I think I missed something. You was talking about wills and when you married, and you said something about the child and the spouse. I think I missed.
What do you mean the child and the spouse? You mean today?
You have a, yeah, this is like
Yeah, I was saying gifts to spouses.
okay.
So that's what I was saying. If you wrote a will and you left a particular asset to your spouse, and in the same way, in the same instrument, same will, you give that same gift to your child, it goes to your spouse.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Did you
So
see
they
what that
can't
word?
share it? They can't share it?
No.
Oh.
If you wanted them to share it, then you should have written it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So also in the Wills Act, there is an exception. So remember, if you want to execute a valid will, you have to be 18 years or older. You have to write it, and you have to sign it in the presence of the two witnesses, who then have to attest or acknowledge afterwards. So, but under Section 39 of the Wills Act, it says that any member of the Bahamas Defense Force, being in actual naval, military, or Air Force service, which means they must be on duty, or any mariner or seaman being at sea, they can dispose of their real and personal estate without complying with the formalities for the execution of a will. So Section 39 authorizes any member of the Defense Force who is in actual military service, not somebody who's home now in their house, someone who's actually out there at work. Any mariner or any seaman being at sea can dispose of their personal estate, though under the age of 18. And it can extend also to someone who is not at sea, but also when he is circumstanced that if he were a member of the Defense Force, he would be in actual military service within the meaning of the section. So that means that you don't actually have to write your will. You can speak your will to another person, to another Defense Force officer, or another seaman, as to how you want your assets disposed before you die.
So this is merely a conversation they can have.
Yes.
I assume this person is dying on the spot?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if they say this while they're dying,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
And
That's
they're in active duty.
active duty, okay.
Uh-huh.
Not off.
No, not off.
Okay.
All right. So under the probate of estates, it says that a depository of wills is established under the control of the Chief Justice for the safe custody and preservation of original wills. So if you wish and you execute a will, you can actually deposit the will with the Chief Justice. There's a payment of $25, and the will must be sealed in an envelope which shall state the name and address of the testator as it appears on the will, the name and address of the executor as it appears on the will, the date of the will, the name of the person who deposits the will deposited may be withdrawn and substituted for a fee, and the registrar shall record every will withdrawn, whether substituted or not. And a will, subject to the rules of the court, will only be open to inspection by the testator during his lifetime or upon proof of death of the testator by the personal representative or the beneficiary or an attorney. Deposit of the will does not make a presumption that such will is the last will and testament of the testator. Because remember, you can write a will today, you can deposit it tomorrow, and then you could write another will next month and don't deposit it. So that's why you see when a person dies, you hear them say that they're looking for the will, because they have to make sure that the will they have or the will that the attorney presents is actually the last will and testament of the deceased. Now, I explained to you already what personal representative means, and it's a term that is used for both executives, which means that it's somebody who died with a will, and administrators, that's someone who died without a will. And remember, in that role, the personal representatives, they act in the shoes of the deceased. So they're actually carrying out the wishes of the deceased. Executors are appointed by the testator, and administrators are appointed by the probate registry or registrar. So if you are appointed as a personal representative, first thing you have to find out is what are the assets that belong to the deceased at the time of the death. And those assets come under the control of the personal representative. The exceptions are jointly owned property does not pass to the personal representative. They pass to the survivor of the joint owners. under the rule of survivorship. During his lifetime, the deceased may have nominated some of his property, and those passes directly to the nominee, such as life insurance and pensions. Some sums payable under insurance policies may be paid directly to third parties. So let's say if you had a life insurance and you put beneficiary my estate, then that directly goes to pay all of your expenses. The benefits on the pension scheme are usually paid directly to the beneficiary, and property the deceased held as trustee, then they do not form a part of the estate. Now the court can grant to one or more persons, but it can't be more than 4 executors of a deceased. So to apply for a grant of probate, the following is required. The executor must, within 12 months of the death of the deceased, file a petition. They have to pay the prescribed fees, and in support of the application, they have to attach the original will along with 2 copies. It must have an affidavit of an attesting witness in proof of the due execution of the will, evidence of the death of the deceased, and of course an oath from the executor stating the date and place of birth of the testator, the domicile of the testator at death, the deceased died test date, entitlement of applicant to the grant of representation, and an undertaking to administer the oath according to law. And you have to submit an affidavit evidencing the result of the search for any prior grant of representation. And of course, as the personal representative, you have to provide your IDs. Now, in certain instances, you may have to fill out an affidavit of delay if you take too long, or a power of attorney. A resolution, if a trust corporation is named in a will as executor, whether alone or jointly with another person. There are different types of grants that can be given by the court. You could have a grant of probate, which normally happens when a person died with a will. So they died testate. You could have a grant of administration. That's the person died with or without a will, but it's in a limited way. You could have an administration pending suit, and that where there's a legal proceeding pending the validity of the will or revoking any grant. You could have a grant de bonus non, and that's where a sole or surviving personal representative dies intestate without fully administering the estate of the deceased. Then the court has to appoint an administrator to administer the goods that are left unadministered. A grant limited to an action, and that the court grants a representation to an administrator to represent the estate in proceedings. You also have grant of special administration, and that's where the personal representative is abroad. And if after 12 months from the death of a person, any personal representative to whom a grant has been made is residing out of the jurisdiction of the court, you can make an application for someone else who is interested in the estate of the deceased. You could have a grant during minority or executor, and that's where the only person who would otherwise be entitled to a grant is a minor. A grant of letters of administration with the will annex for the use and benefit of the minor. And of course, is limited until they attain the age of 18. So a grant in the case of mental incapacity is where the court is satisfied that the person entitled to the grant is, by reason of mental incapacity, incapable of managing his affairs. And the grant can be made to attorneys, deceased person who died outside of the Bahamas, in an additional name to consular officers. The deposit or to the credit of a deceased person, a manager of a bank may, without production of a probate or letters of administration, allow $2,500 standing to the credit of a deceased person, as long as they provide satisfactory proof of death of the deceased and such evidence that may be required by the manager, and appears to such manager to be entitled by law to the said sum. Before any payment is made, the claimant shall make and deliver to the bank a declaration to the effect that the sums are be utilized for funeral expenses, and the manager shall ensure that the declaration is forwarded to the Registrar General. A bank shall not be liable in respect of any claim by any person in connection with the payment made in accordance with this section. Because you know, once a person dies, persons like to run to the bank to see if they can take the balance of the account. But the law states that you can have $2,500 for funeral expenses. So where an employee, other than a public officer, has died and is entitled to sums from his employer, and the employer has in his possession a document executed by the employee under oath identifying payment to a specified person, the employer may, without requiring production of probate or letters of administration, pay to the person so identified such sums. So after you go to the bank, then you can go to the person's job to see if there's any sums that are owing. So any sums that is owed to that employee does not form a part of the estate. Because remember, any assets that form a part of the estates by law, you have to pay off all of the deceased liabilities first before you start to dispose of the assets. So a personal representative of the state has to file a duly completed return within 6 months after the date of the grant of representation, where the estate is situated in the Bahamas, and is 9 months if it's in the Family Island. And of course, anyone who has entered in the standing search will be sent a copy of any grant which corresponds with particulars given on the form. Any person who wishes to show cause against the sealing of a grant may enter a caveat at the probate registry. Every executor and administrator in the exercise of his administration is entitled on administration to the whole or any portion of the estate, and then they give you what they can actually charge. Where the total value of the property does not exceed 10,000 is 3%. And where the total value exceeds 10,000 is 3% on 10,000 and 2% above 10,000. So of course, the registrar may disallow any remuneration. Where the executor or administrator fails to administer the estate with due diligence or fidelity, or to rule or render the amount of the administration and distribution of the estate according to law. So a personal representative of a deceased person, if you waste or you convert the assets to your own use, any part of the real estate of the deceased and die, his personal representative shall, to the extent of the available assets or the defaulter, be liable and chargeable in respect of such waste. So by law, if the deceased had an executor and an executor did not complete the administration of the estate, then the executor of that deceased then continues on with the probate. If any person without full valuable consideration to the defrauding of creditors obtains, receives or holds any real or personal estate of a deceased, or effects the release of any debt or liability due to the estate of the deceased, of course, they shall be charged as executor in his own wrong to the extent of the real and personal estate receiving or coming to his hands. And the penalty for making a false declaration is a fine not exceeding $5,000. Any comments? So when you have time, you could sit down and you could read the Inheritance Act. Remember, that's for a person who dies without a will. And then you have the Wills Act, which tells you the process for writing a will. And then you have Probate and Administration of Estates Act, and that speaks about filing the estate of the deceased either as an executor or as an administrator. And remember, an executor begins work immediately upon death. An administrator does not take action until after they are appointed by the court. No comments? I hear none. Okay, so let's move on to pensions. So when you talk about pension planning and its requirements, I mean, this is always a good area for you as a professional CIFP. If you wanted to start to begin going into your own private business, this retirement planning is a good area. Because you know, Bahamians don't like to save, or maybe they can't save. So financial planning for retirement, you have to think about a lot of things. You have to think about insurance, education planning, debt management. You have to think about investments, estate planning, tax planning, and cash flow management. So for most people, some people start off with insurance as soon as they get a job. Then when they get into a family situation, lots of expenses, they drop. But the older you get, the more the insurance will cost. Then you have education planning. You have to decide whether or not you need to further your education prior to retirement. You have to look at your education during your whole career. And all of that costs money, so that needs planning. Then you have debt management, because you have to look at the age of where you are now, what's your outstanding liability, and how you're going to repay it prior to retirement, because you don't want to take large debt into retirement, because that means you're going to have to work longer after the age of 65. Then you have investment planning. When do you start investing? Do you start at the age of 18, 20, 30, 40, 50? When is the right time to begin investment planning? And then you have estate planning. How you gonna manage all of your assets? Who you going to dispose it to? Then of course, tax planning. You have to make sure that you don't have any outstanding taxes, because once you die, you have to pay the government all of the taxes that are due. Those come out first. And then of course you have cash flow management, which is making sure that you have enough cash when you retire to pay your expenses. Any comments? So this is a good area to get into in terms of advising people how to plan for retirement. So a pension plan is a financial vehicle and gives one a retirement income paid for by investments that are built up. And the purpose of it is to ensure an adequate standard of post-retirement living for individuals consistent with the resources available to society. So why do you need a pension plan? Is to promote workforce stability. It's setting aside private funding for future living expenses when the recipient is no longer working and earning a living. So local insurance companies, we have quite a few domestic companies and domestic intermediaries. The central bank, in their quarterly report, they said that the largest concentration of labor force participants and accumulated pension fund assets continue to be seen in employer-sponsored schemes in tourism, the financial services, and communications and utilities sector. The largest proportion of savings accumulated remain in public sector securities, followed by mutual funds, equities, and bank deposits. Retirees' benefit typically consists of funds received from their private pension scheme, supplemented by their benefits from national insurance. And then add to that individual personal savings from their insurance annuities. So private savings is emphasized by the fact that the NIB contributions are calculated on insurable earnings. And I know you would have read recently in the newspaper and you would have heard discussions that NIB itself is in problems, financial problems. Looking at the future as to whether they will have sufficient monies to pay when persons retire. So for employees outside the civil service who do not participate in private pension schemes, the most significant expected sources of retirement resources are bank deposits, assets from domestic credit unions, and insurance annuity products. So the total value of private pension grew by 3.1% in 2016 and by a further 3.9% in 2017. So there is a growth in the domestic economy when it comes to pension plans. So at the end of 2017, the assets stood at 9.7% of GDP. So the two largest concentrations of national savings were in bank deposits and the assets of NIB. Private individuals' deposits, inclusive of savings and fixed and demand balances, stood at 3.4 billion or 27.7% of GDP in 2016 and 26.7% in 2017. And these funds are not a significant portion of an individual's retirement buffer, since average balances in more than 75% of these accounts are less than $10,000. With more than 3/4 of total savings are determined in less than 10% of individual accounts. So you can see right from those last statistics that a lot of Bahamians are in jeopardy once they hit retirement because they don't have sufficient funds and savings. NIB held collective retirement savings of 1.6 billion in 2017, and that represented only 13.3% of GDP. Domestic savings and life insurance companies and credit unions amounted to 1.4 billion in 2017, and that was about approximately 11.3% and 3.4% of GDP. So the different types of pension plans, there's a defined benefit plan, there's a defined contribution plan, and of course, there's a provident plan. A defined benefit plan guarantees the payment of specified benefits upon retirement, proportionate to participants' length of employment and income history, to ensure that benefits are adequate to satisfy predetermined benefit payments. Actuarial estimates of the present value of future payable benefits are subtracted from the present value of assets expected to accumulate over the duration of the scheme. This plan, the employer specifies a payment, a lump sum, or combination on retirement. It is predetermined by a formula that is based on an employee's earnings history, the tenure of service, and your age, rather than on directly individual investment returns. So the actuarial assessment of these schemes determines the present value of future payable benefits and is based on credible assumptions about the employer's workforce demographics. Looking at the average of active employees, the ratio of pensioners compared to active workers, and the present value of assets. The Provident Fund is an arrangement whereby private contributions are made by employees and employers, and benefits consist of a lump sum payment made up of all contributions on a member's account, plus interest accrued from the date of first contribution. A defined contribution and provident schemes employ established contribution rates that are not typically adjusted, which ensures relatively stable funding costs for employers. The final benefits cannot be projected in advance as they are linked to the accumulated savings at retirement. So the main difference between a defined contribution and a provident fund relates to the fact that the defined contribution plan converts at least a portion of the retiree's benefit into annuities, and which are payable in installments. Provident schemes disburse participant funds as lump sum payments upon retirement. So when you look at participation in pension plans, during 2016, the number of private pension scheme participants rose by 2.8%. The participation strengthened by a projected 2.9%. And as a proportion of the employed labor force, the fraction of workers covered in these schemes contracted by 1% to approximately 26.4% in 2016, and by a further 0.7% to 25.7%. So participation in pension plans, the distribution of plan participants by economic sector remained relatively stable over the 2-year period. We looked at hotels and restaurants, employed the majority of participants. Then the financial sector was the second largest, and then the communication and utility sector, and the remaining was slightly elevated by 4.7%. So the total value of assets held by private pension fund schemes rose by 3.1%, and a further expansion of 3.9% occurred in 2017. So the asset side of pension plans, government debt securities holding remains the main portfolio. Bank deposits as a share of total fund assets steadied at 12.5%. And the shares of exposure of employers' business increased slightly to 6.3%. So when you look at retirement itself, once the plan and the employer are solvent, the fluctuation in interest rates or the financial markets, your pension money will be coming in. In some cases, pension plans are indexed to the consumer price index to address inflation. And in some plans, it's every 2 years. You will have an adjustment made to your plan. So retirement planning, you cannot access the principal in a pension plan. You receive monthly payments. If you're facing financial difficulties, it is prudent to have other funds available to cover those costs. Now, there are some employers who allow you to borrow against your pension plan. Just be mindful that you have to pay it back. So most persons upon retiring use these funds to pay for their health, their dental, and other medical expenses with the employer. Because once you retire, you'll find out that your insurance payment is not the same as a retiree. In some instances, double, in some instances, tripled. And especially if you have a condition, the rates are very high. And there are some plans where at any age, you can split up to 50% of pension income with your spouse or partner, which may provide significant tax savings. So an employee may wish to ask themselves the following questions. How much pension income will I receive before and after I turn 65? Is the pension indexed to inflation? How much will my surviving spouse or partner be entitled to? Are there other benefits I can keep regardless of pension decision? And are these available to my family too? Will my pension payments change once national insurance benefits begin? So there are some concerns. Small companies have no desire to establish pension scheme. And self-employed persons usually have no formal retirement plans. So next you turn to the National Insurance Board. So retirement pension is the most costly benefit that NIB offers. So you know that NIB did pay out a lot of funds during Hurricane Dorian. And we do know that we have a lot of persons who have retired and who have not contributed to the fund, but now seeking benefit from national insurance. And we know that the fund itself is purported to be used for other purposes by the government to fund other projects.
Do national insurance pay persons who haven't contributed?
So do they pay?
Yeah, persons who
Yes,
haven't.
yeah, there's a minimum amount that they can get.
Oh, okay, because I thought persons had to contribute a certain amount to qualify.
There is a minimum amount that they can get. It's not much.
Okay,
It can't pay light, water, and cable. So that's why you see them sometimes on the streets. So a 60-year projection of the Bahamas' population and National Insurance Fund finances, given the uncertainty in projecting such an extended period, the timing of certain events and the rates that will apply are presented as ranges. Contribution income will never again be sufficient to meet total expenditure. That's the first thing you have to realize. So if you're advising someone about retirement, the first thing is they cannot hang their hats on NIB. Because actuary says that in every report, that the income will never be sufficient to cover expenditure. The fund will be depleted between 2028 and 2033. What year are we in?
22.
So how much more years you have? Not much, right?
No.
Okay. The
Wait,
pay
are
as
you-
you,
Are
go
you
ahead.
saying 2028 there will be absolutely no more funds in NIB? Is that what
Yes,
you say?
yes,
Although they'll still be collected NIB contributions from each working person?
yes. And this what I have in here was the 9th actuarial report. So this was before Hurricane Dorian.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy.
Because there are a lot of people who the government have to support. And the only social funds that we have is NIB.
they need to go after the businesses that aren't paying.
They are doing that. Some of those businesses have liquidated. They had no money. Yeah. So it's going to be rough. Do you remember the article that was in the paper a few weeks ago by Mr. LaRota, the MP? And there was a lot of backlash because of what he said.
Yeah, Ms. Archer, I have a question about that. Legally, can I stop paying? I mean,
No.
since
No.
I have no
No.
benefits when I
No.
retire,
No,
that ain't fair.
No, you can't.
So what I paying for other people?
Of course. And hopefully when your time comes, the other people will pay for you.
They ain't gonna pay. Not this generation behind us. They ain't into that.
Well, it's automatic. It comes out of your salary.
It ain't gonna be nothing to be paying for. It's nothing
Exactly.
like 28.
Hi, Ms. Archer, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've tried 2 questions I couldn't ask, so my computer was being wild.
Okay, go
Uh,
ahead.
In relation to NIB distributions for persons that have not made contributions, is that reflective of persons over the age of 65, or is that comprehensive?
No, over the age of 65.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good. That was the question. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. So Mr. LaRota said, the Minister of State, with responsibility to NIB, he said he anticipates that NIB contribution rates will increase within the next year, given the unsustainability of the social agencies fund. You heard that word?
Isn't the next increase July 1st? I thought they said the next increase July 1st.
Well, don't forget now, he said it had to increase, and then they came back and they said they're not increasing it, that he spoke out of turn.
But they just published today contributions will be increasing July 1st, didn't they?
I think I saw something on what is it, paternity aid.
Right, the maternity benefit and funeral benefit is increasing. Also, the insurable wage.
Let me see if it
will
says that.
increase.
Yeah, let me see. National insurance. Because when he made that point that it was going up, they said that he spoke out of turn.
Hmm.
No, that's still, their website still have 2020. Where you saw that in the papers today?
No, our work sent it today.
I saw it somewhere on social media, either on our News Bahamas Facebook page or Eyewitness.
Oh, but I don't see it on NIB. Let's see. You say insurable wage went up?
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you know soon. See if I could get the answer to that one. Not too sure.
710 to 740 and $3,007 to $3,207.
Well, how they sneaking that in? How is that? How that in?
They could do that because ain't much people just make them kind of wages.
Employee whose income exceeds 710 weekly or 3,077 monthly are able to insure more than income.
Yep.
The insurable wage ceiling. Okay. And so you see how they sweeten the party. Y'all could have some more children. You'll get $15 more.
Can't be serious.
And because of a lot of debts, you get $60 more. Isn't that wonderful? So it's been now from the last, what, 6, 7, 8, 9th actuarial report. They said the same thing that Mr. LaRota said, that the fund is unsustainable. So this is what the actuarial, he reported in his last report. He says, to enhance benefit coverage, require contributions from all employers for workers with 2 or more jobs so that future benefits can be based on their regular combined insurable wages. So if you have more than one job, they want you to deduct NIB from both. Devise a more simple and attractive means by which self-employed persons can contribute. For unemployment benefit, remove the condition that defers its payment by the number of weeks of redundancy payments received. For survivors' benefits, clarify and possibly revise the rules regarding eligibility of widows or widowers over age 40 who have no eligible children. For pensionable civil servants, revise the method used to calculate average insurable wages for pensions so that it will take less than 40 years to obtain the maximum benefit once they start contributing on full insurable wages in July 2013. For retirement benefit, consider increasing the normal pension age from 65 to 67, which means you work 2 years more. For retirement benefit, consider revising pension calculations so that they are based on average career insurable wages instead of only average insurable wages in the best 5 years. Seek further ways to reduce medical care caused by directing patients to facilitate that adequately provide the level of care needed. Introduce a meaningful penalty for late payment of contributions. Insist that any new or expanded benefits to be financed by the National Insurance Fund be fully funded with a new contribution or transfers from the Bahamas government. And of course, increase investment diversification by setting 2 key 10-year asset mix goals, overseas investments to account for at least 20% of the fund. Because you know they use most of the fund domestically. So the question is, can you live off $333 per month? That's the question. So the National Insurance Board provides 7 general benefits, 5 industrial benefits, and 4 assistance packages. The general benefits include retirement, invalidity, survivors, sickness, maternity, funeral, and unemployment. Industrial benefits include injury, disablement, death, funeral, and free medical care. Assistance package is old age, non-contributory pension, invalidity assistance, survivors assistance, and sickness assistance. So look at the handouts. The first one you have is industrial benefits. And this is when there's injury on the job. And notice on each one of these, it tells you what the conditions are in order for you to apply for the benefit.
What handouts are you referring to, Ms. Archer?
It should be right in your packet. From NIB. You have the benefit. See it? Gypsy drivers, maternity benefit, self-employed, unemployment, funeral. You see them? And survivors benefit. So if you have an industrial benefit, injury benefit is a weekly payment made to an employed or self-employed person who suffers a job-related injury or contracts a job-related disease. And as a result of that injury or disease, is unable to work. It is paid at a weekly rate of 66 2/3% of the worker's average insured income, with a range of 66.42 per week as a minimum payment and $33.30 per week as a maximum payment. There are no contribution conditions to satisfy for the award of injury benefit. And if a person is injured before he or she was able to pay contributions, then the average weekly insurable wage used to determine the benefit rate would be that of a person in a similar job and wage income level. Then they have one for jitney drivers. Of course, you know, they fall under self-employed. Maternity benefit, as you know, just went up. So the maternity grant is a one-time payment of $530. Whoopee! Isn't that wonderful?
So wonderful.
To claim the grant, the woman must submit a form duly certified by a doctor stating that she has been delivered of a live infant. To qualify for maternity benefit, you have to satisfy two contribution conditions. You have to pay 50 contributions into the fund, and you must have paid and or credited with at least 26 contributions in the 40 weeks immediately before the week in which you stop work or you have the baby, or 26 contributions immediately preceding. I'm surprised they haven't brought out one of these here for paternity. Moving with things that are happening worldwide. Don't you think so?
How is it that we don't have, they don't provide paternity leave for?
They're starting to, that's what she's alluding to.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're starting to.
Oh, they're starting to, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
jobs are now making provisions for paternity leave. But I'm saying,
And they're increasing maternity leave as well.
yes,
Oh, really?
yes, they are.
Mhm.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, now in this time, we need to move more towards mothers staying home with their children,
Yes.
I agree.
dropping them off to these little daycare centers, and the children getting sick and being brought up the wrong way, and bring home things that you've never heard before, and actions that you just strange. So a lot of things have to change. But looking at how the workforce is changing, the generation that is coming up now that's in the workforce, you can't just keep your head in the sand. We have to change with the time. And socially, we have a problem. And because we have a problem, we have to learn how to address it. And one of it is trying to have mothers and fathers spend more time home with their children.
Do you think that can actually happen? Because I've been hearing mixed views on the work at home. The person's working from home.
Because of COVID?
Yeah.
Well, the thing that drives making that change, it will have to come from social services. Social services has to be the one to provide the statistics, along with the police, as to what's happening and how do we address the problem. So it's a combination of both. And then when you look at the workforce and you look are lobbying worldwide, you have same-sex marriages, you have same-sex adopting children. So all of these matters, you have to look in and they have to be addressed because they're happening here. We have 2 females who are married in another jurisdiction and they have children right here. And so the laws are going to have to be amended to address these people. You all went quiet.
They say the laws are, I don't see where the laws are being amended, but it seems as if people are moving with the tides, and some of us are turning a blind or deaf ear to matters that should be addressed, and just keep it moving.
Yeah, but see, the thing about it is that it'll all come to a head when you have a lot of situations in the schools where you have parents who are of the same sex. Because we have that now in the schools.
In the Bahamas?
Yes, ma'am.
So what exactly is the issue? I don't understand.
Hmm?
What exactly is the issue?
Because sometimes the partner also wants to have time off to be with their
Oh,
child.
like that. Oh.
Yes, they want to have time.
Ms. Asha, also in the case of adoption, say I adopt a child, is there anything, I'm guessing I'd have to use whatever vacation, if it's a young baby, I'd have to use whatever vacation time I have saved up because there's nothing to account for that presently in the law, right?
Oh, but your company can put it in there.
Your company.
So there's a lot of different things in the workforce that is changing, and the law has to keep up with the changes. No matter how much you fight it, it's happening. So you're gonna have to deal with it. So what if you have employees who want to have operations same sex? They want to have a sex change. How do you deal with that?
Right. Well, I have two questions. I mean, the first is how does all of this tie into the constitutional perspective of the Christian nation and the fact that Christianity and the principles that our legal system is built on, and then with the work from home, I think the question is what role does corporate Bahamas play in this? Because I can tell you, my boss is not about that life at all.
What you mean? What you mean? Would you say your boss is not about?
Working from home, there's a lot of Bahamian companies that feel like when you're working from home, you're not actually performing.
Yeah, and even though you have the ability
But
to work from home, I agree with that. From the corporate side, they much prefer you to be in the office to see you
They want
physically.
to see you, smell you, hear you, exactly.
They think
So
if you're in office, you're more productive than home.
Which is so not the case.
And I don't think they have any data on that. But that they're just basically purely on tradition. They want to see you. They want to see you at your desk. You can be flamming at your desk, but they want to see you at your desk.
Because I found out that working from home during COVID, sometimes I was waking up till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. Because it's right here and you're comfortable.
Yeah.
I still have my work laptop on working.
Yeah.
As do I. Mhm.
So I don't know. I see where, okay, in some jurisdictions, what they're doing is they're looking at a hybrid situation. 2 days at home, 3 days at work. Because understand that it gives the employee more time to do more family-oriented things while they are working. So everything comes down to your employer and their principles, what they believe in. If they're family-oriented, they would look at, okay, my employee is producing while they are home, they produce while they're at work, and they're happier doing this hybrid situation. But there are some functions where you just have to be to work. But there are some functions where, like say you're in sales, you don't actually literally have to be in the office. If you have a quota to make 50 calls a day, 25 calls a day, and you have a sheet that you would record what you do, what's the difference? if you're getting the job done. So it's not just looking at whether or not the person is performing. You could also look at whether or not you're going to hire permanent versus temporary people, because a lot of jurisdictions are now moving away from permanent employees to just temporary employees and let them work from home. And they hire them on a 3-month, 6-month contract. And that's cost efficient for the company because they don't have to give any benefits. So all these things in 2022 and moving into 2023, you're going to see a lot of changes happen because it's happening internationally. And if you listen to the talk show last week, you hear a lot of the comments being made by Canadians about Bahamians who are applying to live in Canada because of the way in which we treat them. And then, of course, we're going to now in discussion in increasing the minimum wage. And then there's agitation for a livable wage. So there's a lot of changes that's going to be happening on the employment side.
Yeah, they're also kind of slightly pushing out the older generations as well. People don't talk about that.
Hmm? But those things are happening because the younger generation feel that they don't need the older generation because the way in which the older people do it is not the modern way. So again, when it comes to talking about pension and retirement planning, there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. And like I said, it's a good area to start once you get your designation, to think about advising people about retirement and looking at the cost of retirement. Because another thing can happen is that you can retire and you could be healthy, besides maybe having diabetes, but then you may get like a more long-term illness that eats up all of your investments. And then you're going to need care. And a lot of Bahamians don't think about that. So you retire at 65, you may get sick at 75, but then you live until you're 85 or 90. And that long-term care costs money. So you have to plan for that too. So there's a lot of expenses and a lot of things that you have to think about in terms of retirement. You have to look at your pension plan, whether it will be sufficient. You then have to look at your NIB, how much you're getting from NIB. Then you have to look at what investments you have, what savings you have. You have to look at your liability at least 10 years out before you retire. And if you have any large purchases to make, you have to make sure that those purchases are paid for at least 2 to 3 years before you retire so that you'll have some cash. And then if you need to have any surgeries done, you need to have those done while you have group insurance. So there's a lot of things that you can advise on that needs to be done. So if you're advising a retiree, You have to think about a lot of things. So do you have a retirement plan that would allow you to meet your goals? So the first thing they have to tell you is what their goals. What do they expect to do? What age do they want to retire at? And what do they expect to do once they retire? Do you have an advisor to assist you with planning for the future? Do you know how much income you will need for your retirement? Do you have other sources of income? What investments do you have other than your pension? Will you have any outstanding loans? Do you invest monthly? And then you ask them if you could assist them with their goals. So sometimes you can start advising people from the age of 40, knowing that they have 25 years more to work. Because some people wish to retire earlier than that. Some people retire at 55. Now you can look at, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a off-topic
Go ahead.
question. In terms regarding pensions, if you worked for a private company, you reach 65 and retire, I think they have a private pension plan. Are they in, or can they pay you in installments?
Depends on,
Oh,
so one, you know, getting a lump sum, or you're getting half lump sum and the other half to be paid out monthly for the rest of your life. It depends on the plan.
mm. Okay.
Some plans, you get your contribution and the employer's contribution, and that's it. Then you take that money and then you have to invest it. Some you get half of your contribution, and then the rest of it is the employer's, so you get it in monthly installments. But
Can the company say they don't have the funds to pay all of you your half or full payment right now? Can they say that?
the funds that are in the pension plan supposed to be separate. It's not a part of their ongoing cash flow. Those are separate funds. And they normally don't, because those funds, once they take it out of your salary, those funds are invested.
Yes, I'm thinking that that part didn't happen because they're saying they don't have the cash flow to pay the pension all at once.
Mm. But what you put in. Because if you can't get back your portion, then something is wrong mathematically.
Yeah, I think they need a lawyer because they're being very shady.
But those funds, me. So even looking at someone who's young, who's just starting out, the first couple of years they want to buy a car. And of course, they want to look at getting a place, either an apartment or a house, or save for deposit for a mortgage. But sometimes at that age, you can advise them also to look towards retirement. What age do you want to retire? How much are you thinking about saving? What do you want to invest in? What type of I guess long-term expenses, because you have to look at how many children do you want to have, look at how much are you willing to spend on education. That's from what it is, preschool, the kindergarten, the primary school, the high school, to college, to university, all those expenses have to come out. And of course, then you have to put in a budget for, I guess, miscellaneous, a budget for health, because things happen along the way. And there's a lot of things that you need to calculate for. Because as when we started this section tonight, I read to you from the central bank where it spoke about how we do not save. And a lot of people don't think about saving until it's time to retire. And then they're scrambling all over the place. So even now, as you are in this program, you have to think about retirement and whether or not you yourself are prepared. Okay, let me see if I can find this for you. A question, comment you made a little while ago. So let's say, and under the Employment Act, remember we were talking about leave? An employee who has been employed for at least 6 months is entitled to family leave without pay for a period not exceeding 1 week per annum following the birth of a child or the death or illness of a child, spouse, or parent. But notice it is without pay. And the employee has to provide satisfactory evidence of the birth of the child, the death of the child, or illness, as the case may be. So I'm trying to figure out in a same-sex arrangement. You have to provide evidence of the birth. So then you'll have to give the birth certificate of the child. Well, I guess human resources would already know that you're in a same-sex relationship. And some of them are married in another jurisdiction.
So in that instance, who would sign the birth certificate as the mother then, if it's two females?
One female will give birth to a child.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking like adoption or something. Yeah, you're right.
Sperm is from a donor. Yeah, let me see. There is no, that's it. There's nothing here that speaks to, I'm looking now to adoption itself. It's maternity leave. Yeah, doesn't, so it'll fall under, I guess, family leave. Yeah. So you have a lot to think about in terms of pension, NIB, and then advising people as to how they should plan for retirement. Being mindful that NIB is unsustainable. And you're gonna have to, I guess, be able to advise clients how they can save. So in the thing that came out as effective July 1st, we know that funeral benefits have gone up. I know a lot of people must be upset because this would have come in handy prior to. Funeral benefits. We increased from 1900 to 1960. That's not bad, hey? $60. All right, so the next class, we're going to be looking at the products that we offer in the Bahamas, some of which are utilized by Bahamians and others by persons coming to the Bahamas for estate planning and asset management, or just typically for business. So we're going to look at some of those products in our next class. Any comments? Questions? No? Yes?
No.
You all are very quiet tonight. Last class, you all were full of energy. But tonight, you all sound very tired.
The news is depressing.
What news?
That NIV will be depleted by 2028.
Hold on. NIB is unsustainable. So it has an optimistic ring to it that things must change. That's number one. Two, we know Bahamians don't save. So that means there's a lot of people that you all have to coach towards retirement.
Wow.
Other than that, you know, a lot of companies have pension plans, some don't. You're gonna have to advise people that they need to read the plan. Because if they don't read the plan, then they're going to be surprised when they retire.
Does the public sector have a voluntary or involuntary pension plans?
That's the question, you know. You're talking about government?
Yes.
Let me find out that. I'm not sure if they have do they have a pension plan?
I don't know.
Isn't it defined benefit for like the older generation? I'm not sure about the new ones. Aren't they hiring people on contract though?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's the new way to do it, so you don't have that expense. Because those companies, those quasi companies that actually have pension plans, they saying that it is too costly to pay those out.
Right.
See, that's the problem that they're having now. So a lot of them are changing their pension plans.
Right, because you can't even sign up for defined benefit no more. It's defined contribution.
No, because it's too costly. And that's what the employer look at. So they're putting more persons on contractual work, and they're changing the pension plans. Because remember now, a lot of people would have stayed on the job until retirement because of the pension plan. But that's not happening anymore because the pension plans are no longer attractive.
Oh.
So there's a lot of things when it comes to retirement that are changing. But I know that NIB is one of the big plugs in that whole plan. Another thing you have to look at that people, I think, don't consider is this. In a marriage, you're getting older. You have a mortgage. So let's say you get the mortgage for 25 years. So let's say the mortgage is supposed to finish when you get about, I don't know, say 56, 55 or so, 57. Retirement is 65 or 59, one spouse dies. So you go to the bank to find out, is everything paid off? Because you know when you sign up for the mortgage with your spouse, insurance was included. And you go to the bank to find out that there is no insurance. It was canceled. When it comes to personal insurance, there was none. So now you're left with a bill. You are retired. You're in the house, and there's a likelihood that the bank will take your house. So all of this is what you have to look at, because it's not just about you, it's also about your spouse. And you cannot assume that there is insurance. You have to make it your effort to make sure that the insurance is being paid, because you'd end up being shocked when something happens.
Mm.
And this is not a make-believe scenario. I am telling you, this is a real scenario. This is what is actually happening. Persons are retired and their houses are going up for sale.
I think in that instance, that's where communication between you and your spouse is very important.
Yes.
And that is something that I normally do with my husband on a regular basis. I'd be like, you pay your insurance?
No, but see, you're asking. You got them, they could tell you yes.
No, I normally see proof. I ain't that type now. I see proof. And then on top of that, definitely, well, I let him pay his own life insurance. But with his medical insurance, I do the payment for that. So I'm ensured that it is done.
Yeah, but you need the life insurance too.
Yeah, I check on it from time to time. But I think, like you say, in this instance, I think that's where the communication is important between the two, so that you don't be caught in that predicament.
Yeah. It's and a lot of people found out during COVID. There's a lot of things that they didn't know, a lot of things they didn't expect, and things that they thought were done were not done. So, and another thing you have to look at too when you talk about pension plans and some organizations is the vesting period. That's how a lot of companies get out of it, because they put the vesting period for a long time. Like some companies will say after 2 years, you can begin contribution, you're vested after 5 or after 4 years. Some companies, vestment doesn't happen until 10 years. So the only thing you take out prior to that is just what you contributed.
That's changing as well, isn't it?
Yeah. But you see, everything when it comes to retirement now, you have to look out for yourself. You need to start planning how you are going to survive when you arrive at 65. And you can see, and add on top of all of this, you have to look at the cost of living today, which they say is going to get even worse because the war continues. So, medication has gone up, food has gone up. So a lot of things have gone up. So that means that the buying power of your funds is getting less and less. But people still carry on as normal, as if everything is the same, but it's not. It's not. So don't be depressed now. It's just something for you to think about as you advise people. That's all. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So now y'all sound a little bit more perky. All right. So next week, if you're going to do some reading before, there should be a document in your packet called the Investors Resource Guide. Do you see it? It summarizes a lot of the products that we will go through. All right.
Alrighty.
I'm
Okay.
looking to see it.
See it?
No.
Brown.
Uh-uh.
What do you mean?
I'm looking at my package. I don't see it.
Investors Resource Guide. It must be there. If not, I'll call Mr. Pratt.
If not, I can send him an email and ask him to send it to me.
It should be in your package.
I found it.
Okay, good.
It's closer to the back at the end.
Yeah.
On a tan brown page, the cover sheet.
I said, yep, found it. I think they did.
Yes.
Good. All right, so we're gonna discuss those products next class.
Okay.
Okay.
All
All
right.
Thank-
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, all.
Bye-bye.
Okay.